Want more Culturescape? Join our Patreon. Get sneak peeks, suggest guests, and join our exclusive Discord. Support Culturescape on Patreon today.
I was basically getting canceled and becoming Comicsgate whether I wanted to or not. Social media destroyed comics through cancel culture, through parent companies just trying to get the brand to be trending. They will make bad decisions with the characters at the expense of the fans, and the expense of 80-year legacy characters that we invested into. We are the ones that bought this stuff. We're the ones that gave the companies the money to make these characters who they are, but we don't own them. In the end of the day, that company owns it, and if that company wants it trending because it's Pride Month, you got gay Superman. It's all there. Even if you believe my story or not, you can see this stuff start to become what it is. It's diverse propaganda. The American comic industry's fucked.
Hello and welcome to Culturescape, the show that interviews the geek creators and influencers who built nerd culture. I'm your host, Pete Pischke, and I'm so excited to introduce today's guest. He's a comics YouTuber, a former creator for both DC Comics and Marvel. He worked with some of the best and brightest in entertainment and comics, from Babylon 5's Michael Straczynski to DC Comics legends like Jeff Johns. He's the creator of a popular independent comics series, Inglorious Rex, and a leading figure in the Comicsgate movement. He's none other than the man, the myth, the legend himself, Shane Davis.
Hey, thanks for having me. I don't get interviewed way too often anymore, so I have to knock off the old cobwebs.
I'm excited to have you here because I was reading your stuff in the 2010s. I really enjoyed Superman. I said, or before this year one, that's not correct. Earth one, which was kind of like a modernized version of the Superman story. And if you've seen Man of Steel, the movie, I think it borrows more than a little from kind of that concept that you had worked on for that comic.
Yeah, the whole Man of Steel thing, just to kind of run down that really quick. When you do an original graphic novel, normally, because we were entering not just the direct market, but the actual book market. So there's a thing called a galley. A galley is a cheap printed version of the book. And in our case of Superman Earth 1, there were only 8 colored pages in our galley in the middle. And they cost a lot to make a galley because it's basically a print run, a small print run that is only for review copies, right? Yeah, I think I still have one. They actually say not for sale. And if you'll notice on Superman Earth 1, it came out way before Man of Steel, and it actually had David Goyer, who was one of the writers of Man of Steel, review the book, and actually at the bottom it says David Goyer, Man of Steel. So the book was actually the premiere for the name Man of Steel, which was the Superman movie. Nobody had, before then had known what the name of the movie was. And later on, I would eventually get poached before the movie comes out by Legendary, who was a production company involved with Man of Steel. So I didn't really understand why Legendary had such an interest in me at the time. And eventually I would get paid by Warner Brothers for what they borrowed from my run for Man of Steel. And that's pretty much how that book ties in. Even like the teaser trailer for Man of Steel was a borrowed dialogue from a character named Tyrell in Superman Earth 1.
Yeah, so. I found that interesting because even at the time I felt like that connection or that similarity wasn't being highlighted for whatever reason, which I found a little strange because it's extremely similar. It's the same plot ideas and very similar theming.
Yeah, and Zod's the teaser was Zod basically telling Superman to come forward, and it was his face on static. And I had actually done that in Superman Earth 1 when Tyrell comes to Earth and he makes the broadcast telling Superman, the last Kryptonian, to come forward, that he's out to hunting him. Because he's actually a bounty hunter. It's not Zod. He's a bounty hunter looking for the last Kryptonian. And I had thought to myself, well, it's, being a kid of the 80s, how like there's these magical TV screens that click on to get exposition across, whether it's G.I. Joe, they always go to the terminal, or Transformers, and you just hit a button and they can see what's happening. And that always bothered me. It's like, what, there's these TV cameras picking this up? Like, how is this information getting broadcasted? And I thought to myself, this is alien technology. Why would they just automatically be able to sync up with our technology? Even though they're super advanced, sure, but it's not like it's premeditated. Like whatever their technology is would not connect. So I took these markers. I had Copic markers, and I drew like sketchy lines for Tyrell's broadcast and made it like staticky. I would just assume like in a couple of seconds, whatever broadcast they could connect with our radio signals or interrupt all our TV screens would just be this staticky thing. And that was my theory behind it. And I just put it on the page. It was never written. I never went through editors or anything on it. And before you know it, I see that as the teaser trailer for Man of Steel. So kind of crazy.
That's pretty crazy. I really want to get into that because I think it's really interesting because you worked on that project and it was successfully adapted, or at least lots were pulled from it. But then you weren't allowed to come back and work on the third book for
It wasn't that I wasn't allowed. I actually didn't. So there's a reason for that, and it's a little bit of a long story, but one I don't regret because so when I did Superman Earth 1, it never says Volume 1 on it. It's just Superman Earth 1. And originally, Superman Earth 1, the original series was supposed to be kind of like an Ultimates Universe type thing at DC Comics as monthly comics. And Paul Levitt said, no, you can't do that, Dan. But I do want a line of OGN's original graphic novels. Because Pride of Baghdad had, Brian K. Vaughan's book at Vertigo, had done really well, meaning it had really good reviews. One of the things DC was having a problem with, because they had a very strong market in the bookstores, but what they had a problem with was actually getting reviews on books by basically whatever, New York Times or something like that, whatever high-end reviews, because the internet had clogged up tons of reviews by the time they went to collections, because everybody and their mother had like an opinion online.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really, DC Comics felt, and the sales kind of supported it, that there was this prestige book market that they could hit if they would skip single issues. And then big reviewers would want to review these books because they were the first one to bat to review the books, not just every guy on the internet. And, DC Comics, Dan came back a few months later, once, Paul made this adjustment that this new line of superheroes, a lot kind of like the initiative they're doing with Absolute now, would be OGN. He came up to me to do one graphic novel that then, after that graphic novel happened, would become a monthly series. And then I would jump back on the monthly. It sold so well that Dan and DC Comics went out there and announced there would be a Superman Volume 2. And they said that without me ever signing a book deal. So I had the pressure of the internet, all these people, New York Times bestseller, 30-some months, saying, I'm doing Superman Earth 1 Volume 2, and I've never even seen a draft of the book deal. The book deal would have to exist because it's a whole different type of royalty system. And I had yet seen the royalties from Superman Earth 1. And what was about to happen, which hadn't happened just yet, is it was about to get kicked out of bookstores because Jim Lee held a Kindle up with my book on it. And eventually, I left the New York Times bestsellers list the same week that Barnes & Noble pulled it off the shelf for an exclusive Kindle deal. With all this drama in the book, I felt very disrespected by DC Comics that they had just leveraged the internet and the fans of the book against me without ever negotiating a new page rate, without even asking me if I would be on board with it, any of this stuff, And this is for people that don't know, is a 128-page book, one release, meaning I'm tied up. No original artwork can be sold in the year and a half it takes. If it takes me a year to do the book, they run a galley 6 months. That's a year and a half before I can sell any artwork from the book. Whatever I'm making on the book is all I'm making. And DC Comics was also not moving forward with the second volume before seeing how it sold. So then there's more time. I could end up losing 2 years for 128 pages. So there was a lot of downtime. There was a lot of problems with doing that. And after I went along for the fans and basically did volume 2, and I was never going to, there was never, in my opinion, there was never a world I was going to do volume 3 with the way I was being treated by DC Comics.
I guess I hadn't thought of it like that, but the amount, because you're right, because it's a pretty beefy graphic novel.
Yeah.
That makes sense. That would eat so much of your time. It's funny. I do remember vaguely around. I can't remember if it was the first book or the second book that you had grown to mainstream media attention because some people weren't too fond of how you portrayed the character of Superman. Do you remember any of that?
Yeah.
Katie Couric, I think, was involved.
Yeah, well, a lot of people were upset. Katie Couric was one of them. Some Superman fans, not so the traditionalists. It's interesting because I still today will come across somebody that goes, look at how he drew Superman. It's like, that's the way I drew Superman Earth 1. If you go look at the way I drew Superman in JLA, if you go look at my run of Superman, Batman, Search for Kryptonite, I drew your classic 200 and probably 245 pound Superman. Very beefy, very muscular, very broad. In Superman Earth 1, being a storyteller and respecting the story and the initiative DC was wanting to do, and this kind of pains me when people attack me over it, and I'll tell you why, but when I get to that part. But it was a young 21-year-old Superman. It was a 21-year young guy who had not been active physically, okay? Like he hasn't, he's going to grow into Superman. This is supposed to be like a Superman year 1 type story, right? And being so young, he doesn't even put on the costume till like 90 pages into the book. We basically see him like going to the Daily Planet, deciding on a career. We explore everything he could do. We do all of that stuff. So I had to dress him down. He doesn't even really have the Clark Kent persona. Like he doesn't even get the Clark Kent, like reporter geek Clark Kent till the end of the book. I put the jacket on him with the hood. And it's interesting because it's almost like I came up with this idea that really worked, that I've seen DC Comics try to steal and emulate and put on Red Hood and different people for different reasons, but they don't understand why I did it and why it worked. And it wasn't that his hood was up, it was that it was down. That the collar of his jacket, the red hood that's attached to his leather jacket, actually emulates and is foreshadowing his cape, that he will eventually be Superman. He has that red. When you draw Superman's cape, there's a bit of a collar that comes and folds over. And nobody understands why I did it and why it works. They just know it works and they copy it. But going forward, I think I only drew his hood up for 1 page and 1 cover. That's it. And I would later see tons of people, even like what I think is a Mission Impossible movie, try to emulate the same visual with Tom Cruise in a movie afterwards. But I would see this copied later on, and that's its own thing. But I had to fight on that book. For people that are arguing, well, I drew him untraditionally, it's like I had to fight just to keep Superman not wearing gloves. They wanted to put gloves on him. They wanted to take the shorts off of him. They wanted a whole new suit. And I would tailor the suit a little bit and put some seams in it, and I would give it like a split blue coloring. But for the most part, I was like, no, he needs to be bare hand. He needs that's what Superman is. He's able to, rip through metal with his bare hands. He's able to grab electrical cables. It's a man. He's able to do things with his bare hands. I had to argue just some of these simple things to keep what I respected into Superman into the character. Now, I'm not the biggest Superman fan, okay? Like, I like Superman, but if somebody says, what's your top superhero that you always wanted to work on, it'd be like Silver Surfer. I like Jack Kirby's Silver Surfer. I like that cosmic character. That out of my whole career, the fact I never got to draw Silver Surfer bugs me. Because as a kid, I would have loved to. I was really into Silver Surfer and Infinity Gauntlet in the 90s. So, but I respect the character enough that I understand what Superman fans like about Superman, and I really wanted to try to preserve them. Again, the spit curl, the red shorts, the cape, the bare hands. Now, it's I think the title of Superman Earth One is deceiving. It's more of a Superboy book, in my opinion. But it's a Superboy becoming a Superman.
Yeah, like
him choosing to be
the
hero.
oldies TV show Superboy.
Yeah. I mean, it is very much an origin story type book, and I respected that book a lot in the sense that it came at it a different angle. There's so many Superman origin stories that there was a private meeting I had. Dan, it was a Wizard Billy Con, and Dan wanted a private dinner with me. At the time, I didn't know it was going to be private. I thought my editor would go, but he didn't go. And he sat down, and I was 30 pages in on Superman Earth 1. Now, keep in mind the Paul Levitt's story I told you before, where Paul said, no, you can't do a monthly. You have to do an OGN. So I'm 30 or 40 pages into this book drawn. Like I've drawn Clark Kent playing football, him coming off the train, all of this stuff. And I guess Dan was unhappy with the book. He was unhappy that we're that far in and there's not one page of Superman drawn. Because I think in a way, Dan thought he could break this book up and get his singles out of it too. Like an initial OGN release and then bust it up and make it into singles. So the way we were able to structure this story and tell this story was very reminiscent of a 2-hour movie that, you can get your Christian Bale as Batman, but at the end of the movie or middle of the movie, right? Not at the beginning. You're so many hours in before you'll ever, So, for whatever reason, Dan proposed to me if I walked off that book that I could go work on Superman, Batman, write and draw myself, and I could basically just do whatever I want, any characters I want to use, because Superman, Batman really wasn't in continuity at that time. It was kind of loosely in continuity with anything going on at DC. And basically, I had a blank check to just walk off of that volume 1. I was already 40 pages in. I believed to a degree in what we were doing in that book. I thought it was what we were, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Catcher in the Rye in the good ways, not in the bad ways. It was a young man discovering what he would do with the rest of his life. And I chose to stay on it and finish it because, and sometimes to my fault, I was a guy in comics that if I said I would do something, I would do it. I finished the things I said I would do. I really never walked off a run of any book I've ever been on. I've always finished, for better or worse, my obligations. I just didn't walk off. I mean, there was a time that book could have been obliterated if I had just taken the bait, and walked off of it.
Things would have been, I don't know if, it might have still come together because they didn't have, Michael Straczynski was the writer for it. So they might have still tried to make the project work, but
I don't know. I don't know if it would have, because it seemed like Dan really wanted to blow it up. And that's why I never did 3. And I like Dan. If Dan ever hears this, I like Dan. But in my life, in less than a year, I was on it. Dan asked me to leave it. I decided I wanted to finish it. And then DC sidestepped any consideration or even asking me before announcing I was doing 2. And at that point, I was like, I don't think there's a world I'll be here on 3. So much so, I was like, yeah, I'm doing 2. Why don't we just keep this self-contained? Why don't we just kind of, hard end it and do more with it? And 2 to me was a little bit more fun, that we had things like Parasite. I got to mess with that and get more superhero action out of it. Whereas like book 1 was more about Clark Kent, and then I had an alien invasion type thing. But it's really weird. I think back, like, what if I had just said, yeah, I just want to go draw Man-Bat and Superman Batman or Bizarro or something like that, and I just walked off. I don't even know if the Man of Steel movie would have been what it is, So, and it's weird to me because I would have, I don't know, after going, because I eventually go to work at Legendary and I get to deal with Hollywood for a couple of projects, and I get to see how Hollywood thinks. And when I went to Legendary, Superman Man of Steel was coming out. You know, they had bought the Nerdist. I was working with Max Brooks on a project and Mark Waid, and I was dealing with the owner of the studio quite a bit, Thomas Tull, who was worth about $9 billion at the time. And he, you know, that I started to understand like the Hollywood dynamic a little bit, and how much Hollywood was coming into fandom and seeing fandom as kind of like, you know, money, basically. I mean, Thomas Tull was a fan, but you would start talking to these people and you could tell they weren't really into the geek sphere, the people working at Legendary, but they were trying to use geek taglines to get in. They were buying the Nerdist because they wanted to buy geek culture so they could sell you product. You know, it was, you know, and that's not even the Hollywood side of it. It's just, you know, that's just Hollywood coming in on geek money, you know.
Yeah, which is kind of, you know, everything that took place in the 2010s and the so far in the 2020s, and how it got so big, and now it's kind of just imploded, and it's left a big mess.
Yeah, because there's a lot of fatigue happening, you know, I think, because I still try to keep my head down on, or my head to the you know, pulse of geekdom, you know, and I don't know if we're at. It's arguable if we're at the if we're in superhero fatigue, like because I kind of believe we are, but I can kind of see like just some bad movies being made at the same time, and then I see something like, you know, Deadpool, Wolverine do really, really well, obviously a huge hit, but it's not. I mean, that was, you have to understand that's a different type of superhero. That's kind of like your anti-hero, your you know, I will kill for money hero. You know, that's not what people envision as like the classic cape and good, you know, do-gooder superhero. So it's interesting to me because things like Guardians of the Galaxy would do really well, and again, that wasn't your traditional superhero type thing, you know.
I don't know. That is the $1 million question. It's hard. You know, this is something like back in the day, you know, when Westerns were the thing, and you would be flooded with Westerns at the movies, at the TV, you know,
Yeah.
on TV, there'd be radio dramas. And I guess the argument is, did people just get tired of it because it was just the same thing over and over? Or was it because so many of them were bad and that's what flipped it?
It's weird because unless you lived in that time and you were consuming that material, you really wouldn't understand. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can document box office and stuff and look at it, but that's not the vibe, you know? And the vibe becomes the consumption, you know? So there's no way to tell, well, like, were people like, oh shit, another Western, you know, like, or I mean, why would Hollywood one day stop making Westerns? I assume people were just like, yeah, there's a million of these and and we have the classics. So what, how are you doing? What's the new angle on the new Western? You know what I mean?
There's so much I want to ask you, but you know, keeping on this thread line, when you were working in comics, you know, so you make this good point here that it's one thing to have the data, right? You can have sales figures, you can say, oh, we did so-and-so in this demographic over here, we did great, we lost here. I mean, that's one thing. So that's the data side. And you can kind of know it intellectually. But on the other hand, like there's a lot of this is just kind of ground level that's beyond data that you don't understand unless you're engaging with it. Was there a sense in comics? Because it feels like, especially post 52, post New 52, it really felt like, I don't know if it was the publishers or the money people or because these things were being adapted, but it felt like there was a disconnect between the people who are running things and the people and the readers who are actually enjoying it. Because I remember maybe up to 2014, as late as 2014, early 2015, it did feel like there was some kind of thread between the two. And then post that period, you know, we're going into culture war. It just seems like we no longer want to give the fans what they want. We have our own ideas and we're going to stick to them. And of course, that leaves people who are longtime comics readers like myself back in 2014, who was really enjoying, even though New 52 had a lot of issues, I was trying to catch up on all those. I was reading Injustice, and I don't know what else I was reading. Reading a lot of things. And it felt like it was just such a paradigm shift, because I had gone from, wow, this is so cool. These people, this is so smart. It pulls from all this history, and this is really high quality work. And the people that work in comics, I'm looking at people like you or one of your contemporaries, Ethan Van Sciver, and you guys are more on the artist side. And I feel like these people are amazing. They're so masterful. And how did they do this? Whereas they're reading comics now, they feel like they're watching at the people who just failed up. Like, this is ridiculous. Anyone's toddler could put together a better story than this. Did you feel that shift happening? Did you notice that difference? Was it like kind of like you were saying? Was there like a difference between data and being engaged with it? What happened?
I kind of blame social media. If you really have to boil down to what happened, social media was a big thing that started to have an effect on comics, and the way comics were being produced. At a time, we would have, I think Jay and Silent Bob, one of their movies, they actually run the bit of some dude leaves a review online. I think at the end of the movie, they end up at the dude's doorstep and punch him or something. I don't know. There's a bit of a bit, but at the time, that kind of dates it, what I'm talking about. But comic book editors did not like the internet when it first started. Message boards started happening and stuff where people could go in there and review an issue. And working in comics, I understood why they didn't like it. And there was a point to it, because let's say if I'm working on, like, say, a run that I worked on, Superman, Batman, somebody come in and do a review, and then they would kind of concern troll and say, yeah, I just wish they did, Superman would find the kryptonite and then lock it away or whatever, and then it's like, yeah, that's what we're doing next issue. Like, we set up that shot, like we set that up and we're doing that next issue. And you know that, but you're actually saying that in the sense that, well, we don't know what we're doing because we hadn't done it yet. Like, they're trying to get to our punchline before we can get to it as a criticism. It was super weird. It wasn't just books I worked on. I would read other reviews, and it was like a thing happening. So it always seemed like even if we were headed that direction, we were being criticized for being behind. And sometimes this was off the first issue. And it's like, holy crap, dude, this is a 4-issue run or 6-issue run. That's where we're going. And some people, and Dan being one of them, and individual editors would start to become obsessed with this, and it would start to take off, and there would be like Newsarama message boards and CBR message boards. And it was a thing. Now, this would have been before 2010. Maybe 2005 or between 2005 and 2010 and onward. And eventually Newsarama and people would shut those boards down, where they just didn't have those open forums anymore. And in DC Comics website used to have forums. They would have, you could go in there and they would have threads on, and people would talk about what they think about whatever issue. So there was some sort of action reaction between publishers and fans. When it stopped becoming a reality, like the disconnect happened, I guess is what you're saying. You felt like there was a disconnect between that. And I want to blame SJWs in a sense. So I can only tell you what I saw, right? As a comic pro, and this will lead into Comicsgate and how I would eventually end up part of Comicsgate is, and this is kind of before maybe even the birth, arguably, of Comicsgate.
Yeah.
Facebook would you could just log into Facebook one day, and on your timeline you'd see a post because somebody added you to a group. You didn't even have to hit OK. You just be in a Facebook group, right? And I was entered into this group of professionals, working professionals. This would have been like 2014, 2015. And it would be, I'm not gonna say exactly what certain people said, but I'll tell you a list of like type of creators that would be in this group. You would see people like Scott Snyder, would be in the group, but rarely ever post anything. The guy that used to work with him a lot, I can't ever think of his name, that does Where the Children Are or something right now. Like, he's a really big writer with that. He used to co-write with him a lot. His name is escaping me. A lot of artists like Coley Hamner, Dave Johnson, Jimenez was in there, Phil Jimenez or Phil Jimenez. A lot of people working pros, right? And a lot of people you never heard of. And then some people that were up and coming pros, or they would be rock stars later. And I would be in that group. But at the same time, I would be entered into a Republican comic artist group, right? And so I'm in both of these groups at the same time. Now, I was friends with Ethan from meeting him at Comic Cons and stuff. We had sat together a lot and been on panels together because we both had worked on Green Lantern roughly around the same time. So we kind of ended up working on some of the same stuff, or we would just talk at cons. I mean, that was pretty much it. Somehow we would get pushed together in the same section for working on Green Lantern together. So, I noticed something happened with Ethan. I don't know, online, and there was some argument that he crossed a line telling somebody to jump off a cliff or something. I don't know. It was just some off-the-cuff remark. But Ethan was ruffling feathers, basically, in a lot of ways because his personality, in my opinion, some people were either envious or annoyed them. And I would say his politics was the thing that really set people off. And then one day I'm in this comic artist group, and I see them start saying, what if, I can't believe he said this. He should be fired. And these are comic pros. These are comic pros going off and lighting it up that he should never have work anymore. And one of the artists that's going off about this, I was like, really, for how long? How long should he not have work? Like, what's the punishment? Once you do this, like, I actually talked back. I'm like, is it forever? Is it for a month? Is it for, because, if like an NFL player does something he's not supposed to do, they penalize him so many games, like that's it. There's a penalty, it ends, and then they go back on the field and play out their contract. And they're like, I don't know, forever. And so now they're defensive, yelling at me because I bring up a good question. You're going to punish somebody, like, not saying you should, but if you are, how long is he not getting work? Like, and then I reply back. I'm like, look, he okay, so you think never again? Well, he's still going to cash DC checks for here until the end of his life. And the comic artist starts cap locking at me. What do you mean? And I'm like, well, he has royalties and equities in characters, and every time DC Comics prints these books, his Green Lantern stuff, or if they use any of these characters in media, he's going to get paid. Comic artist comes in again. What do you mean? I get kicked out of that room. I'm out. And I'm talking pros in there. They're bringing up like, oh, he should be concerned how he's going to feed his family, all this concern trolling. And I had just witnessed cancel culture and didn't know what cancel culture was. It wasn't a thing. It wasn't a term that anybody was throwing out there. But I literally watched it happen. Now, at the same time, I'm telling Ethan, like, hey, this is happening over here, heads up. And I think, I don't know what all was going on everywhere in his life, but I think he was already talking with DC to some sense from what I understand in his stories of recounting this. Now, I'm going to Singapore, and there was an artist in there, and I needed to get back in because he gave me some scanner information because the ports are different for electronics over there. So I literally have to buy a new scanner because I'm going to go live in Singapore for about 3 months at a time and do work, right? So I have to scan this work into DC Comics. So I go up to the other artist that's one of the mods in this room, and without saying his name, and I tell him, I have to get back in there because I need this. And he goes, well, you just need to apologize. So I had to write an apology saying, look, dude, sorry I rubbed you the wrong way, whatever, but that was a real conversation. I get back in the room, and I get my scanner information stuff. I stay in the room. Now I don't say anything really, but if I do say something like commenting on a piece of artwork or something, one of the mods come in and check me. They're like, well, you need to tone that down. Nobody asked your opinion. I'm like, no, it's an art thread. I mean, what, we're posting an art thread, but we can't give criticism? Like, what's the point of the art thread? This isn't a public thread. This is for everybody in this group. And I would see these creators start complaining about editors now and the way editors do things. And what I'm seeing is the ability of the mob to cancel people. And I think maybe Ethan is about to get canceled, I guess, from DC or whatever you want to call it. I hate speaking about it because it didn't happen to me. So I try to recount how he says it. So if I'm just saying something out of school, like, apologies to Ethan or anything. But from what we see, then he gets canceled. And I'm like, I just saw the ability and power of comic creators. The ones that were the loudest, never heard of, didn't have credentials, didn't really have credit, able to cancel somebody with greater ability than them, more talent, more success ratio, creating characters for DC Comics that made a job opportunity. And now you can go draw those characters he created. It was something very sinister that I had seen happen and created. And that's when I was like, okay, the American comic industry's fucked. Like it's fucked, because I just saw that happen, and no publisher, nobody stood up to them, and the seals broke. Like, now people can cancel one another. Now diversity hadn't really, it was barely coming in. It was barely seeping into some books. And somebody would go out there and post like, oh, look at what Valiant Comics is doing with Faith or something like that. Or they were really pro Miss Marvel, right? So they'd be like, oh, this book, I can't believe people, especially if Richard Myers, your boy Zach, was criticizing some of this stuff. They were bitching in that room about it. And I made another mistake. I said, yeah, but he's got a point, Not even about the diversity. It was something about, I said he had a point on one of his videos that the way Marvel and DC were running things, it almost looked like they were trying to destroy the company. He made some weird point, and it from a business sense, it actually sounded like, yeah, they're running a company like they're getting either ready to offset it or sell it or just run it into the ground because they want publishing to go away. And I said, so I made the mistake, I guess, of publicly agreeing with Zach. And I didn't realize that at the time, because they were just kind of not liking his book reviews in that group. I didn't realize later on that just even saying you like a Zach video, I even remember going back and talking with Ethan in DMs and sending him a Zach video. And like, this guy sounds like, whatever. Like, I would comment to him about Zach videos. But Zach was a very kind of divisive guy that just came on the scenes. And I think there was one time a Zach video was getting more views than a book was selling. And I think that's when they went from just disagreeing from his takes to now he's the enemy. But I, again, saw that happen in the group. In hindsight, a lot of this stuff kind of gels different, It kind of forms, and you can see, what was happening. At the time, terms like cancel culture and the full throttle of diversity and race swapping of these characters, none of these things, I mean, they're ahead of you. You can't see, So this thing, what do they say, that metaphor, the toad boiling in the water slowly or whatever. It's like, I mean, I saw something happen. I was like, that's fucked up that happened to Ethan. That can happen to me. That can happen to anybody. And you could just have a pedigree or a book that somebody wants you off of, or they want to knock you down a notch, and they can mob up, knock you down, and now that position's open. I'm like, that shouldn't happen in comics, because that's sidestepping meritocracy altogether. These other things like the diversity and stuff, I don't know why the group started to go woke, like they started leaning into it. None of these creators were working on those books, but for some reason they started leaning into them. And I'm like, oh yeah, we need representation. There was this whole thing, well, little girls need superheroes too. We're missing an audience. Women, we're selling to men, but we're not selling to women. And it's like a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush. We at that time, in especially the 2010s, there was a resurgence in sales. I mean, DC Comics was going into, second printings, third printings on things, and not just. I mean, they could be one shots. I mean, Rage of the Red Lanterns one shot went into multiple printings. The only reason it stopped going into multiple printings was because the trade was coming out, and that's when they're like, we're not printing anymore. I mean, that's how healthy the comic market was. I mean, think about it. Something like Green Lantern was DC Comics' top-selling title, not Batman, not Superman, not Wonder Woman, Green Lantern. I mean, if you could take a B-list character or a C-list character and make them sell that well, you're healthy. Your company is doing gangbusters because your Batman's still going to sell, your Superman's still going to sell. I mean, that to me, I always looked at that. That's the strength of the company, is how well those other characters are selling, not exactly your flagship characters. So it was a weird migration that happened, and it felt like it came from creators, not editorial, in my opinion. Now, that's my perspective of it. I have a different scope than everybody else because I was in those rooms. And, it's a bit of history. I would then get kicked out of the room again for something. And then later I was in there because somebody mentioned trying to punch Richard at New York Comic Con or something like that, or taunt him to try to get him to take a swing at them. And I talked shit about it in the room. That's why I got kicked out of the room. And I said, that's really stupid. That's going to affect everybody, because let's say that happens, then some kid gets hit or a bystander gets hit or somebody falls into somebody. Then you're fucking it up for everybody because you're trying to purposely instigate a fight. So I'm kicked out of the room. Next thing I know, a few months later, that conversation slips out of the room. I'm getting attacked by the creators because I reposted it. And then I'm being accused of being a guy that leaked that out of the room. And I'm now getting attacked even though I'm out of the room. And see, in all of this, what I don't understand, being kicked out of that room multiple times and everything, is I was basically getting canceled and becoming Comicsgate whether I wanted to or not. Just because I was like, hey, don't start fights at cons. Hey, how about, why cancel somebody? They're still going to get paid. I mean, what do you think? You're going to get their job? You're going to get their money? Like, just for having a reasonable conversation, I'm getting bounced out of this room over and over. And, I'm kind of being canceled a little bit at the time. I would still continue to work with Dan, but I would have more friction with editors down the road. What wasn't in the room was editors, though. There was never any editors. It was always creators, or even new creators I'd never even heard of. I don't even know if they were printed. And writers, or were big writers in that room.
That it is fascinating. It feels embarrassing now because you see where the industry has gone. It's just completely plummeted. I mean, it's a ghost of even what it was 10 years ago, which is really sad, because I do remember that period you're talking about, and it was exciting to be a DC Comics reader. It would routinely get reviewed on sites like IGN. There was so much talk about what was going on there with the comics. You were right. All the stuff with the Emotional Spectrum, Green Lantern, Jeff Johns, all that was really huge. It was just like a really good time to be a DC Comics fan, the comics reader in general. And all that interest, all that goodwill is just gone. It's just been...
Yeah, and on the other side, Marvel was putting out things like Civil War. Absolute Justice was coming out at DC. Ultimates was a line. Brian Hitch, Mark Millar. Ultimates Fantastic Four was coming out, which was still, I think, a decent comic. If you read it, it was not traditional, but it's still a fun comic. Ultimate X-Men. There were so many hot books happening. Because I remember I was moving and I was coming across my single issues, and I had left them in my comic shop bag. And I was flipping through them. I was like, I can't believe I was buying like Civil War, Injustice, Green Lantern stuff, all in the same, bag. It's like that's crazy that these things were coming out the same week. There was a reason to go to a comic book shop and spend a lot of money, and that was something that also scared me about the mainstream, is the ability to maintain that, or the lack of energy to maintain that. Like, we would start to shift into what is a heavy writer's market. You would see later on, you would start to see Marvel try to do things called the architects. That would be like, Jason Aaron, Matt Fraction, maybe Mark Waid was part of that. Greg Rucka, maybe. I don't know. The guy that wrote Winter Soldier, his name's escaping me at the moment. You would start to see like this writer-driven market, which isn't necessarily bad, except there's something sinister in that. And what's sinister in that is that if you make, say, I'm gonna use myself, but you could substitute any artist for this. Like it could be Ethan, it could be me, it could be Alex Ross, and you pump Alex Ross up or you pump Shane Davis up. There's only so many Shane Davis books you can get a year, right? So the greed in comics is about to kick in. Nobody ever sees this as greed, though. The writer's market isn't that, hey, we're going to make better stories for people to read. That's not what that was. The writer's market, which will come, is, and what it starts the downfall of what I consider the single issue sales, that is about, Matt Fraction can write 4 books a month. Shane Davis can not even draw 1 book a month. Which one do we market? What do we say is more important? Because if I market this one creator so much, the marketing power into a creator, you can obviously get more written books than drawn books. And it was a type of corporate greed that led us into the writer's market. And nobody's ever going to own up to that. I've heard this conversation, though. This is a reality. And it did happen. You can look back and you can see it. But what bit them in the ass and what plagued American comics for the longest time is Marvel and DC had this attitude, we're never going to market artists like we did in the 90s. Why? Because the artists we marketed in the 90s, so heavy, Todd McFarlane, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld, they went and formed and became our competitor, Image.
Yep, Todd McFarlane probably being the most famous example.
Yeah. So they came around, well, we really want to market people. Let's market the writers. That won't happen again, but it did. Image 2.0, meaning the sex criminals, the Kelly Sue DeConnick, that stuff. I mean, Matt Fraction went off to do sex criminals and literally says the guy that used to write Inhumans because he walked off Inhumans. Marvel had marketed him so much that he was able to walk off the book and just say, we just don't see eye to eye. Walk across town, go to Image, and sell a bajillion copies of Sex Criminal. And market it that way. And they had already did the thing they said they wouldn't do with artists. They just did the writers. And then you would see a lot of these guys, and nothing against it, go make creator-owned books and 1 million TV pitches. These aren't even comics anymore. These are TV pitches. They're the lowest budget comics you'll see, meaning like the effects on the page. It's normal clothes, it's normal settings, or the boring camera angles, no special effects, no explosions, no superheroes, no action even. And there's also this big political drive, which is very common with Hollywood, to be very progressive, and you'll start to see that happen. And it's about representation. And the whole representation shit kills me because you abandon fans and their investment in time, not just money, but time in the original characters every time they chase it. It seems like such a careless thing. And I also remember seeing a lot of representation in comics. I remember seeing Cloak and Dagger show up. There's a woman and African-American character. I remember them appearing and they were a new character. I remember new characters coming on the scene. I remember teams like New Warriors led by Night Thresher, diverse character. It's like I don't remember that, at least for me, they were able to make diverse characters and diverse teams and not sacrifice Spider-Man, not make Spider-Man Miles Morales. I never understood this. It's just, I don't know if it forms from lack of creativity or they don't give good deals to creators to make new characters. But for some reason, they took the easy route, and that was the all new, all different. And that was the real downside of the American comic book industry. And again, led by writers, right? led by diversity, and we're going to race swap, we're going to gender swap, we're just going to, Asian Hulk. I mean, that's when it was like, okay, the floodgates are open. We're just letting it. It doesn't even matter if fans want this. This is what we're doing.
Yep. And at that point, the relationship between being a comic book reader and the comic book publisher, it almost feels like you're being force-fed your vegetables.
Yeah. And I mean, that's just my side of things. And I know that, but everybody's going to be like, Shane went into this big long rant. It's like, that's my perspective behind closed doors and working with publishers and everything. And like, I feel like this is never really fully out there. People are going to dissect what I say. I'm sure they're going to say like, he doesn't know, he's making this up. I'm like, it's all there. Even if you believe my story or not, it's still, you can see the watermark, right? You can see this stuff start to become what it is. And it's diverse propaganda for why the fans want it. No. It ain't about you, the fan. It's about right think. It's about like, and eventually this would lead beyond race and gender. It would actually become about not gender. It will start to redefine, you're not even getting the tip of that's just tip of the iceberg. Up under the water, there's this whole trans movement getting ready to happen, and then it's like the books aren't even action anymore, because now it's about, we have to discuss pronouns. We can't like we have, I mean, what are you going to do? Like have an X-Men fighting in the danger room going over pronouns? Like, no, they're just going to sit and talk about pronouns or make you feel bad as a reader. And at some point I was like, are they marketing and trying to sell, like they're trying to call you racist, but then offer you a product to buy to prove you're not racist? I was like, is this some guy in bookkeeping? He's like, you're a bigot, you're a racist, but if you buy this comic and if you go to social media and tell everybody about this comic, guess what? Now I sell you redemption. It's like, I was like, there's got to be a reason this is happening. I'm not crazy. I've been a comic fan my whole life. I know if it usually comics sales and working in comics was all meritocracy. If the book sells, it exists, right? And publishers would chase books and if X-Men selling, they won't just sell one X-Men book, they'll sell 6 X-Men books and miniseries to boot. That's how the industry works. They always used to do what sells. But now we're doing something completely different. And it doesn't make sense, even as a fan, a consumer, a creator. And that's not even getting into the part where we're getting ready to venture into the cancel culture that this group of artists did, that then cancel culture is going to start to happen for diverse creators. And then we're going to get the mega Galactus bad guy T. Franklin out of this or something. I don't know. But we haven't even seen diversity start working into the hiring side of things. It started as representation of characters. And what these guys didn't realize is you're actually building this beast that will eventually become representation in the creators working on the books. Not how talented they are, but the color of their skin or the gender or their sexual identity. Actually, without naming a name, I knew a comic creator and I knew her married. And then later I would know her as a open lesbian talking about being a lesbian. And I to this day, I still don't know if she was ever a lesbian. I don't know if that was just the in thing to do to be a comic creator.
There's more than a few. I think DeConic's one I've often heard that they say that about. But there are more than a few that pretend to be some, they're not. But, that monster they created ate so many of them. And I think you're right that this all kind of started up being very self-serving. And eventually it morphed into something bigger that kind of just ate the industry. You made this good point where they were trying to push it. I don't know if this is because I think of Jeff Johns and how he became synonymous for a long time with the new Green Lantern stuff. And maybe it feels like it pulled out of that somewhat. But you were saying like they wanted to push the right, you're not just buying this character or this team. You're into this writer. So But the problem with that was into the social media era, you would have someone like Mark Waid, who's doing some genuinely pretty good stuff with Spider-Man. I could have the wrong name here, but like Spectacular Spider-Man, I thought was fascinating, even though a lot of people hated it. But then you see Mark Waid on social media, and that Mark Waid is almost like a different person. That guy is just horrible. He's horrible. You don't want to have anything to do with it. And they're like, okay, I can't read this anymore. Because Mark Waid's crazy.
I think Mark is one of the guys that really alarmed me the most, because I hadn't met him and I had worked with him a bit, and I felt like he was kind of he knew how to play to fans in books. Like very few writers, what you'll know, Jeff Johns is a writer that knew how to play into fan service, but Jeff is a comic fan. You know, Jeff has always been a comic fan. And I would say Jeff Loeb is another writer that could play fan service really well. And that's a very good talent to have as a monthly comic book writer, because you're able to move the story along, but also hook people into the next issue. It's very valuable to get a writer that can do that. Because the way the direct market is, you need somebody showing up. You don't need somebody, the direct market doesn't need somebody waiting on a trade. Okay. The direct market needs somebody that's willing to go to the comic book shop every month for the next issue. Why? Because you're hooked. The cliffhangers, the reveals, things like that. And somewhere those skills that and these guys that had it, that were selling gangbusters, I mean, you know, that were putting books on top 10 lists like JSA. JSA sold when Jeff worked on JSA. He leaves JSA, it doesn't sell. You know, and now all of a sudden that skill set that's very important to monthly comics and even getting us to the trades, if you like trades, is now abandoned for propaganda. The propaganda is not hooking somebody to come back in the shop the next month. And I never understood that. You know, I had written a few books at DC and Image and stuff like that. So when I saw this shift happen in writing, and that's another thing that I would eventually find out, is when I went to Image and I go to Image Expo and I'm talking about a book Extend, is I'm being criticized for drawing, and this is right when All New, All Different is coming out. There was an article and it refers to Image Expo, and it recalls me a relic of the past, that I represent the 90s and what used to be Image. And this really hit me in a weird way, because at San Diego Comic-Con, I actually had Todd McFarlane come up to my table to shake my hand with his wife. He had a Spawn medallion on, like oddly. Yeah, he had a little Spawn skull hanging from his neck, and his shirt unbuttoned. And it was like, there's Todd McFarlane to shake my hand for coming over to Image. And I was like, that's a bad thing. And again, I was a white male. They brought that up, and I'm like, holy shit. It has manifested into now the fans, not just the creators canceling and looking for representation, but now there's this female audience that everybody was looking for. Everybody like, we need to sell to the females. And now the females that we brought in are saying, yeah, but he's a white male. That's a problem. It doesn't matter how my artwork looks. It doesn't matter how I write. Now my skin and my sex are the problem. And it's like, holy shit, it's over. It's over. It's over. Because I remember Tokyo Pop going under, and they always had the female audience. You know what the female audience did? They sat in the bookstore at Barnes & Noble in the floor and read the books for free. That's what you wanted. You went and got the person that would not drive to the comic shop. You went and got the person that would not pay for the book. The person that you had to say, please, lady, can I walk down this lane? You guys are clogging this up, you bums. You went and got a bunch of bums. You went and got a bunch of bums. And comic sales have only depleted looking for the female audience. And I know people are going to say, she ain't that sexist. Look at the sales chart. You went for them. You got a bunch of bums. We did a video one time. There was an X-Men book that was being canceled for selling something like under 20,000 copies, 16,000 copies, but was being pirated like 100,000 times. You know, like, who did you go after? Those people maybe won't spend money. They won't support your local comic shop. They won't support, they're only going to support piracy. They're not going to buy comics. They were never putting books in bags and boards to collect. Why would you go after that new clientele sacrificing? Okay, so here's my thing about that, to be clear. Mm-hmm. If just advertising to them is fine, but don't manipulate your content for them. You know, if you want to say, hey, ladies, buy Wonder Woman, that's fine. Do that all day. But don't manipulate the content for them, because eventually you're going to lose the customer you have, which, you know, I feel like we're living in.
Yeah, all over the place. Star Wars being a fantastic example. It went from
right.
Yeah, because it was primarily a boys. This is what Star Wars was. It was made as a toys franchise. It was made to make money off of toys to little boys.
Because he had an incentive, right? He had some of the licensing, so he had incentive to make as many action figures as he could with those films. And it made cool visuals, cool characters you didn't even know much about, like, you know, Boba Fett's one of them. Like, you didn't know much about him. He looked fucking cool. He stood in the background, you know,
That's
had
enough.
a cool ship. That was enough, you know? And that's what pains me about the comic industry, because, and I get, like, I've worked with pro writers like Brad Meltzer and I guess JMS to some extent. You know, he has more of a Hollywood background. When I came to working with him, he was an Emmy award-winning writer of Changeling, I think, Angelina Jolie film. So, like, you know, when I was working with him, he was super Hollywood. And I had also worked with some of the writers from the TV show Heroes. So I had this history of working with different writers, comic and TV and whatever, novelist. And one of the things I kind of came across, not so much with JMS, but other people, is they didn't understand visual pacing at all. And they didn't understand the tricks of turn pages or splash pages or double page splashes or half page splash. They didn't understand the impact of these things or the gravity of these things, especially page turns. They didn't understand that. And so sometimes they would have to rework the script. And I even had conversations. They would just ask me, how are you making this work? Oh, like this double page spread. It's so cool. You turn and there's this just a big shot. And I was like, because it's different than TV, because, like, you know, a TV screen's a TV screen. It doesn't change sizes. And there is a skill to comics that is kind of being forgotten and lost, especially today. But there's just all these years of technique and making great comic pages and good splash pages and hooking people into the next issue and the next installment. And all of it's getting forgotten because everybody's not about making great comics. They're about making the best propaganda. And the news cycle fed into it. So it becomes like this feeding frenzy. So, and that's a whole thing too. But like the shill comic book media only reporting about the woke stuff, it becomes like this feeding cycle. Now they're feeding off of one another as cells are depleting. So the publisher starts to see people are talking and responding to gay Superman, right? Now, they don't see the cells come in automatically. Before me and you do, but not, they just see people are talking about it and there's some response. They see the response. And because of the media side of this, there is the aspect that the parent companies care more about the talk of the character than they do the comic book sell. And that is another thing that will ruin the American comic book industry. And I do think it's been ruined by that, is that these parent companies want their brand being discussed. Warner Brothers, I don't know if they care how many copies Superman sells at all. Like, I don't know if they do. I think they care that people are talking about it, even if it's a bad take. I remember going back to Superman Earth 1, it got called the Twilight for superheroes or something like that. And that bugged the shit out of me, that when they put that on the book, and I actually said something, and they knew they bothered me, but they're like, yeah, Shane, but understand, Twilight's really big, and this will sell books. And I said, yeah, but one day, I looked at Eddie Bergens, my editor, and I said, but one day, those fucking kids are going to be eating out of a dumpster, and this book is supposed to be evergreen, so why would you write Twilight on it? And he looked at me like I had just said like I said the N-word or something. It was so offensive to him that I said those kids in Twilight will be eating out of a dumpster. And only Arpats is the guy that made it out of that franchise and did much of anything, you know, and I was right. And it's like, why is that on my book? But the idea is they chase anything that to get a reaction to parent company. They want that type of buzz. They want that type of bigger buzz on the brand. And I think they'll chase it. And I think they have chased it for diversity. And I think they've chased it for, anything that's trending on Twitter. And that's where I say social media destroyed comics through cancel culture, through parent companies just trying to get the brand to be trending. They will make bad decisions with the characters at the expense of the fans and the expense of 80-year legacy characters that we invested into. We are the ones that bought this stuff. We're the ones that gave the companies the money to make these characters who they are. But we don't own them. In the end of the day, that company owns it. And if that company wants it trending because it's Pride Month, you got gay Superman.
So you grew up in the 80s. Did you ever take a program like Dare? Did you ever have to take Watch Out for Drugs?
One class. Yeah. One class.
Okay, so in Dare, this is exactly true. But one of the things I think that kind of parallels here is like the kind of the dangerous fight with getting high, and the way they put it is like you experience the drug, you get that peak, right? And it brings you, when you're done with it, it brings you just a little bit down from where you were before at normal, so baseline. And each time you use it, you get a little less. It brings you back a little bit more down. And eventually, you're doing this so often, it brings to you that even at height, you're maybe hitting baseline. And that's kind of how it felt like with comics with the short-term thinking. You're right. They would chase these controversies. I
think they call it chasing the dragon.
Yeah.
Is that the term? Yeah. So you can never catch it, but you're chasing I think that's what a term that they use for that, chasing the dragon. Yeah.
It's oddly reminiscent of the cover boom at the early 90s, where they were constantly chasing this new, like, we're going to push this off the top. And all it did, though, was all these short-term boosts. It's just degraded it. Like, no one cares. No one trusts it. No one believes, like, oh, you're going to make this big change. It's going to last a week. Like, no one... It's just the trust level between me and these books is just so low. And I feel like that's pretty normal now for anyone that is or used to call themselves a comic book reader.
I mean, and again, like, I can never see ahead of me going back to that DM group I was, or that private group, that Facebook group. I didn't see what was ahead of me or what I was seeing then. But I feel like if I really had to kind of say what happened and what I think is in the future is like, especially with this absolute thing I see DC doing now, and I don't think it's going to be anything. I want to go on the record. I almost feel like it's not even worth talking about. I think it's like DOA already. But I feel like a lot of people think it's an evil SJW, and a lot of people assume like it's like an evil corporation, or Heather Ontos gets thrown out a lot, stuff like that. But the reality is I feel like we're kind of caught in two things: a corporation looking for a different version of the character that they can own on the corporate side. Again, corporate greed. Corporations don't care about people. Okay, corporations are sometimes that there's people in places, but they usually don't outlive the corporation and really don't even run the corporation. So two things are happening. Public domain on some of these legacy characters are coming up, right? And, Hollywood really doesn't have the ability to build something new anymore. Everything's based off a video game or an existing property or a book or something like that. Like it's gotten to what I think is a fever pitch. That Borderlands movie that came out, I think, is a really good example of it. Where they invested so many millions of dollars into a video game and the movie nobody watched. So staying on point, that's happening. And it's kind of led by social media and the woke and what's trending and what's progressive at the same time, because that's what media always wants to do. They kind of want to get ahead of the curve. They want to be in the lead. It always, and they will chase progressiveness to off a cliff probably. And I don't see anything good happening in the American comic book system because of that. Because right now you brought up the variant covers. Well, the variant cover system is still in play quite a bit. And, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles will have a million variants. Some of these variants are actually, nobody's talking about this, but they're actually kind of going to J. Scott Campbell. Nothing against it, but he's able to acquire his own variants now that he'll sell on his website. They get those get counted in. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but the variant program is far extending. Comic shops ordering however many thousands of covers for their shop, and keep in mind they're not selling through all those covers. And sometimes they're ordering triples of those things. I knew comic retailers that ordered 3 covers, Virgin, logo, same art, pencils, versions of the Batman Catwoman wedding. That didn't happen. He didn't sell all those. He ordered them, but he didn't sell them. So the numbers are super, super propped up and inflated with a variant program. When you're making a reference to the old variant program or the old gimmick covers, comics were selling a lot. Now they're propped up by a variant program and in an artificial collector's market that's being manufactured, with variants that are very, very rare and hard to get. And you have to qualify for them. The retailers have to take a very, very risky thing to, like a 1 in 25, a 1 in 100 variant. I mean, they were doing things like get a Jim Lee sketch variant, and that book could come damaged from Diamond. That's a sketch variant by Jim Lee, a hand-drawn cover that is destroyed now, and you just mortgaged your house on it, or something. You're ordering 100 more copies of a book you can't sell for a book that came damaged. It's a high-risk, low-reward situation, and a lot of comic shops that I'm seeing around me, and they'll advertise they sell comics. You go in, it's all back issues now. And I'm talking like it's a safer investment for them. So the American comic book industry, it doesn't matter how far they want to push you forward and be progressive and be right think and all that. At the bottom of the line, the direct market is going to sell what it can sell. It doesn't matter what your right think is, that you think the world needs to see, nobody cares if Ironheart's a thing. If nobody wants to buy the book, the comic book shops are just going to quit ordering new comics. And I've seen more comic shops go out of business or start leaning into more antique toys and old collections and stuff. And quite frankly, it's a whole market being it's just destroyed. I don't know how it would come back at this point, because you're talking about fans having faith and retailers having faith to bring the direct market back. You have to, it's hard to win people over. You're talking like, what are you going to do? Denounce woke? You're going to say, I'm not going to make Superman gay ever again? The company, as a parent company, can't do that, because then they're phobic. They got themselves boxed in. There's nothing they can do. And I actually have a very grim outlook, if you haven't caught it, on the future of comics. It just, and that's what I see in the future. Like, that's where we're at now. I'm barely peeking around the corner, but around the corner, I think we're just going to see these companies try to make more corporate variants that they can own when these characters slip into public domain.
I don't disagree. If you look at like the average age, the median age of the reader for comics has only continued to go up, and at some point, you're gonna run out of people doing that. Do you think? Have you seen that the DC has tried these shrunken down graphic novels, but now they're like manga size, and they got them on the spinner rack? Have you seen those? I haven't seen any stats, but I've heard from some people that those have been doing pretty well. Do you think they'll make a difference?
Okay, so this is my brutal honesty on it. Will it make a difference? Short-term gains, yes. At the end of the day, no, because what they're trying to do, and I get people are like, well, we got to go where readers understand the format. The reason why manga, there's a couple of because I saw it in 2010 or before it had been mid-2000s. I saw the Tokyo pop boom. I don't even know if most people remember it. But even DC Comics tried to print manga at one point in time. They picked up the license that Tokyo Pop didn't. And when my comic boxes would come, there were DC manga coming in. They weren't on DC characters. They were just whatever manga they could grab that Tokyo Pop hadn't grabbed. The Tokyo Pop boom was a thing that happened. It made a lot of female readers. I mean, I wasn't reading manga at the time. I couldn't tell you what. I want to say like Bleach was a big manga. Maybe now I can't remember the name of the book, but there were a few mangas that were kind of big. Most of them appealed to women. The manga boom that's happening now, and people get these stats all wrong. I was thinking about this today because my wife was talking to me about the ending of My Hero Academia.
Yeah, that just finished.
But a lot of people don't put together that 2 mangas became a very good bridge for American comic book readers. One Punch Man and My Hero Academia were both superhero centric. They were like, hey, try manga. You like superheroes? Your superhero books suck right now? The strength of manga is never the strength of DC Comics. It's never the strength of Marvel. And that is, but I will say The Walking Dead had this strength. The Invincible had this strength. And that is that the books are numbered from the spine 1 to ending, numerically. They're collected, they're accessible. It's very easy for somebody to know where to start and to finish. I remember talking to a loose fan online. I was like, she was a celebrity. I'm not going to name who this person is, but they're a pop culture celebrity. And I said, so do you like American comics? And they're like, I like Spider-Man, but it's really hard for me because I don't know where to start and where to finish. Like, I don't know how to get into Spider-Man as a reader. And it's something that has plagued the American comic book system, especially when it comes to the trade market. Manga's strength is that it starts, this manga starts at this number and that. It worked when Tokyo Pop was a thing before Tokyo Pop went under. Tokyo Pop went under just because they couldn't get their own manga to work. And it was just a license deal, and they were only making whatever they were making for translations. I mean, they always sold. They dominated the shelf space. It's a lot like today, but you'd have to remember walking in the store and seeing it. So what's happening with the manga market right now isn't so much that they're doing something different. It just came back in another wave. And it came back with this time what I feel is like more action manga, like My Hero Academia and One Punch Man. I collect them. So I know it appealed to me. Now I was a collector of things like, Akira, a very few manga would I pick up. Maybe very few manga I would pick up. But they had a really good segue. Our quality was at an all-time low. Our collections are a mess. It became a perfect storm for manga just to be the new thing kids read. I don't think they were doing anything exactly better than us. It's just they hit the format better. Like they hit like accessibility better. It was just easier to jump on board. In theory, color comics are more appealing. That was the American comic strength. But we also produced a convoluted mess of back material that was never formatted right. So back to your question, this new thing DC Comics is doing, yeah, they're reformatting these books into these manga shapes, but they're not going to have a 1 to 10 and then the story ends. So that's its weakness going into this venture. That's why I think it'll have short-term gains. The other problem is it's plagued with multiple variants of the character, multiple creators on the character, multiple visions of the characters. These are things that manga usually they don't deal with. It's usually one creator to the end of it. And my wife is more into manga than me. So she'll tell me like, like the creator of what's the one with the two brothers and the one brother is in an armor suit?
I got nothing for it. Is it a Gundam related thing or is it?
No. It's like it's a suit of armor.
Oh, Full Metal Alchemist?
Full Metal Alchemist.
Yeah, I
She
love
was
Full
like,
Metal.
hey, the creator of that made that big property, and then they roll on to do a manga about farming or something that isn't a commercial success. But the commercial success, they'll probably always make money off of, right?
Yeah.
So, like, even like, Toriyama with Dragon Ball, everybody's like, oh, yeah, he wanted to get end it at one time. Like he just kind of wanted to drive it into the ground and end it, or something with GT or something. I've heard this story a million times. How true is it? I don't know. But, I mean, some of these creators, they only need that one big hit, and then that's enough for them probably for the rest of their life, and they move on to another story. So to just say we're just going to shrink our stuff and then manga people are going to read it is absurd. It's kind of absurd in the sense that these characters are going to be, they're going to be broken, bent, and left for dead, basically, because the companies want to hang on to them. A corporation wants as much Superman material, as many Superman movies, every reboot, every, new actor. Like, they don't want these characters to ever end. Whereas manga, they're okay with the story ending and having this nice this nice bit of work and move on to another character. So there's just no way DC Comics and their corporate structure is going to survive in a manga field. They're just not going to, because they never want to let go of Batman. They don't want an ending for Batman. They don't want an ending for Superman. So to me, there could be some short-term gains, but like once they put out like a Superman Earth 1 manga, right, or whatever that size, what are they following up with? You know what I mean? Like how I mean, do you have 10 volumes of that? No.
To your point, I was looking at one of those spinner racks, and they're all older comics. Like I have a black and white hardcover of Batman Hush, which is a beautiful book.
Yeah.
And there's a version of that shrunk down in manga form. But these are almost all older books, and many of them seem to be like Elseworlds material or something that was, kind of like where you're pointing to, has a very definitive beginning, middle, end. And you can't just, I've always thought this was one in the DC's strengths that you definitely used to have, was all that Elseworlds material. I thought they handled it very well. So that kind of stuff I think could adapt to it. But to your point, I don't think that they could go to mass adoption, because just like you're saying, just the way that everything's in the structure of business, how it's done, how it's created, it just won't fit.
And I mean, we were, in our defense though, the American comic book, not direct market, but even before it was all newsstand. The direct market, again, was kind of following that monthly newsstand format to some degree. And that's the beast that we are. The thing that we let go was our quality, the ability to drive people, again, to the comic shop because of the quality of books. I mean, not because of diversity or anything, but to be honest, Marvel couldn't hang on to Mark Millar, or people, DC really couldn't hang on to Frank Miller. But I don't know if they have to hang on to those guys, but the new talent that started to happen wasn't based off of skills. It wasn't based off of any type of ability to put asses in seats, so to speak, with their talent. It was the new talent they formed is off of, this lady over here, Willow Wilson, she's a Muslim, so that's why she should be hired. When I met her for the first time, my friend's like, oh, you know who she is? She's a big deal. I'm like, why is she a big deal? What she did? It was like, she wrote this one image book, but she's a Muslim. You should. I'm like, fuck. What's that got to do with her ability to write a comic? But that's even how, like, the SJW see the talent. I remember a friend of mine, which it really bothered me at the time. He's like, oh, I need to go meet this other creator. I'm like, why? Well, because she's an artist and she's female and she's part Asian. I was like, but how does she draw? That wasn't why. He's like, to him as a writer trying to get a book done at Marvel, he knew he had higher probability of getting a pitch passed by hitting female and not white. his project had more chances of being greenlit if he came in with a pitch like that. And that, again, like, so to your point, we don't have the material that people are going to like say, hey, this is good. So even if there's a new publishing initiative, like the Walmart thing was new, what did DC go and print? They went and printed stuff back from the era that we're talking about that was good, like, the Green Lantern stuff that Jeff and Ethan did. Public Enemy by Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness. Superman, Batman, Public Enemy. That's the stuff that they were putting in a new publishing venture. So, okay, here's a new publishing venture. The manga thing, what do? You go back to that era again of the good stuff. The real question is why isn't Marvel and DC in 10 years making good new stuff? Because of identity politics and the creators that they're hiring. It's a very convoluted mess. And again, I'm going back, even if you just look at the publishing model, you're boxed in. If you now don't hire somebody because they're deciding to cut off their penis, are you phobic? But I mean, that seems like an extreme, but that's an extreme that is in our system right now. If T. Franklin writes a tweet that she's draining wallets and balls because she's a sex worker and she's handicapped, if you don't hire her, are you phobic? That's our hiring practice now. It doesn't matter, do people like T. Franklin's work? And I'm not attacking T. Franklin. I'm attacking the people that that built this comic structure of talent being in books. Now, I'm not saying she's not talented. I don't know if she's talented or not, but I know these things, which is not what I should know about her. What I should know about her is this really cool comic that happened, and this character did this, and this is a pivotal thing. And then I go, but who wrote that so I can read more of their stuff? That doesn't exist today. That type of comic doesn't happen today, and it's not able to happen. I mean, the idea that a talented person's going to come out here and make new books in the direct market right now is like finding a unicorn, because it's almost like you need the most diversity points in the pyramid on that person, and they need to be talented on top of that. It's like, whereas before, it's like, are they good? That's all that matters. Doesn't matter how tall they are, how much they weigh, do they have bad breath? None of that shit matters. Are they good at what they do on the finished book that hits the printer? It's, again, like, you can come up with any new publishing initiative, but if you don't have the new good product to push out, it's, I mean, you're talking about, and I'm going off on a tangent, but this is the future. If the survival of the American comic book industry, think about this for a second. If the survival of the American comic book industry is coming up with a new publishing initiative to run the old shit through, it's limited, because eventually you run out of that old stuff to run through it. That's alarming. You don't need a new publishing initiative. You need good new comics. And what you're talking, this manga thing blows my mind, because it's looking for a new publishing initiative. It's trying to actually siphon off of manga. And I understand there is a short-term gain there. I get it. But you're still going to eventually end in the situation you don't have good new material to run through it, even if it works. It's set to fail.
Yeah. No, that's kind of it is. I mean, it's more said now out loud, but it is kind of the thing that's not being said is like, there is an expiration date on the comic book industry, at least as it's been known for it's the last century, which is sad.
Yeah, it's hard for me because I've lived so many of my years without putting my age out there as a fan, as somebody who went to art school to become a comic artist, who walked into the DC offices with a portfolio and rejection letters and coming back with new samples and just being determined to punch my way into this industry through a portfolio that would get me work. It's upside down in my head. But I'm coming from different eras of comics, and that's what they say. That basically they're saying, well, the comics is for us now, not you. And maybe that's the case. Maybe maybe it is for people of diversity. I mean, maybe that it is about progressive propaganda. I just would like to see it sell. You know, to say that's what it's supposed to be. That's the thing is, we're not talking about independent comics or something where it's some dude's artistic little book. We're talking about mainstream Marvel and DC books.
Yeah. No, that's a good jumping point, because I know this has gone on. This is a good talk, by the way. I appreciate having your insight on what's going on with the comic book industry. This is kind of a good jumping off point, because I feel like, I think the independent comic scene, there's a lot that they do very well, and I congratulate anyone that can make it work. Okay, but sometimes I do hear, and it sounds a little bit diluted, and I'm not anyone I mention here, I'm not trying to put them down, but they're saying like, well, Eric July, he's going to say the comic book industry, he's going to rebuild them. We're going to outsell DC and Marvel, and I'm like, guys, the metrics, you don't understand it. The metrics you need to have to be successful as an independent comic book artist is like a percentage point of what DC and Marvel used to do. Okay, we were talking about, even now, as terrible as DC and Marvel's doing, they may sell 10,000 copies across their book. For an independent artist, 1,000 is a lot. Even just having 100 some. The numbers are nothing, they're nothing similar, but I get the feeling from a lot of people who want Comicsgate and independent comics to be bigger than it is, they kind of do buy into this.
So there was somebody online that said, you guys keep crowdfunding, but I'm just disappointed that you guys haven't ventured into a new market or whatever. And there was this thing that we tried to do. I think it was Ethan Van Sciver, myself, and John Malin. We tried to go to C2E2 and we got kicked out of it. And the reality is that is us trying to branch off into different markets, right? Go there literally on the floor and put our books up when people are walking in, and prime real estate of C2E2. But the reality is gatekeeping by SJWs, not gatekeeping off of meritocracy in the past. That's what used to happen. If your stuff wasn't good, somebody gatekept you from making a bad comic. Today, it's the opposite. So the criticism of that some of it's criticism, some of it's expectation by fans, and I get it. Like, a lot of people invest into these books. Inglorious Rex 1 did $300,000, I think, or 303. Inglorious Rex 2, when all was combined with the second chance, I think it was 316,000 copies. I mean, our print numbers on Inglorious Rex are actually going up, because Inglorious Rex 1 had a lot of our other books, Starlight Cats, like 900 copies in that campaign. So if I took 900 copies out, I mean, Inglorious Rex probably looked like 260 to 316. But getting off point, I understand, with all the support of our backers and everything, that they would like to see us kind of graduate back into the mainstream. The reality is I'm not T. Franklin. There's a reason I was kicked out of C2E2, or, as much as I can talk about it. And John you can see the video of where they're trying to push him out of the con and push him out the doors, actually putting hands on him and moving him to a door, two guys. I mean, the reality is trying to say that we're going to intercept this business of Marvel and DC, or like Eric July goes out there and says, we have to compete with them in quality, not sales. And we'll never compete with them in sales. And it's a stupid thing to say when Eric does that. I will say he's stupid when he says that, for a couple of reasons. You're not it's stupid. He knows this too, that it's ambitious, but it's still kind of stupid. We don't have a system like Marvel and DC does, where we hold a retailer pretty much at gunpoint to, if you want that Secret Wars cover to go with the other one, that you have to order, 50% more of this random issue of Deadpool or this random issue of Guardians of the Galaxy. I've talked to retailers. So we don't have that mechanism to force somebody to over order to get one cover. Like, we don't do that to a retailer or a retailer that owns like 3 stores. Think about that. Not a guy that owns 3 brick and mortar stores or 9 brick and mortar stores. So it's ambitious and it sounds good to say we're going to beat them. It's a big success that we're even making better comics than the mainstream right now. Like, and I feel like it's getting overlooked or taken for granted that we're doing that. It's becoming expected that, like, you know, if Inglorious Rex or Godlike or Cyberfrog come out, that it looks better than any book that you could go into a comic book shop and pick up off the wall, or at least 90% of what's in a comic book shop, right? And there's a reason that these, what they call facsimile issues, that they put out these old comics that they print again with a different cover price, are top sellers. It's because the quality's shit, whether it's the story, whether it's the actual characters, or it's the actual artwork. There's some reason that those books sell really well. And even Dan DiDio did not like how well they were selling. He thought that it was alarming and that there were things that needed to change. Of course, that never happened. But it's like, I think that in crowdfunding right now, you know, people are making books that Marvel and DC forgotten how to make, or they just don't have the balls to make. And I think it's really important that there is a market, even if it's considerably smaller, is happening. Whether it be somebody like Brian Pulido with Lady Death and stuff right now. Like, I mean, he's hitting it off the walls with his characters. I mean, Marvel and DC aren't going to sexually exploit a character like that, a female character. You know, and there's a demographic that wants that. You know, big boobs and the sword, they want that. It's important that this exists. I believe it's important that this exists. I believe it's important that crowdfunding exists. That I have the ability to go grab it. And that's the first thing that's important. The actual beating Marvel and DC, I maybe one day, you know, but I think it's more likely that we don't beat them, that they get decimated.
Yeah.
I think that's the more likely scenario. I don't think it, like, if there is a day that I'm beating Marvel and DC, it's probably because they're dead. I don't think but that's how I'll outsell them. I think this is a storm. This is at least what I tell myself when I get up every day and I'm like, I'm trying to sell Inglorious Rex 3, go back on 9 Lives Comics or Indiegogo, is I'm like telling myself, there is a future, again, something around the curve I don't see, but I kind of know where the tempo of things are and where things are headed, and they're uncertain. Okay, I know they're uncertain, but I do know quality exists. And I know that there's an interest for new stories and new ideas, and believable protagonists, and you know, the hero's journey, all of that stuff. Good story. I do know that people react to good story. I may have to go into a smaller market and build something, but I know what I can control in this bad situation, which is the American comic book industry, with so many different facets and so many different things going wrong, almost like the perfect storm to destroy it. And I know I can at least control the quality of what I'm working on. And I know I can put all my energy into it. And if I can just find a fan base that will support me in it, I don't have to sell what Marvel and DC does. I mean, I believe that somehow this stuff will hit a bigger market one day. And I think everybody supporting crowdfunding should believe that, because this stuff is archived. This stuff does exist. It is there for when the market's going to open back up to non-woke comics. Okay? It's better to be ready when that market happens. If there is a turning point, that a resurgence in the American comic book industry that's almost the opposite, where it's actually stomping out anything woke, have have like a buildup of material for that. Be ready for that. And I think people backing these books, I feel like they know that. We just don't know how it translates to beating Marvel and DC one day. We know the quality. Everybody backing our campaigns, they know the quality. It's just, I mean, and I'm not going to be foolish and say, well, I'm going to be Marvel and DC. It sounds good, but we're starting out small. Like, we're keeping a fire alive right now, which is, the stuff we're doing in Comicsgate, I believe.
There is nothing wrong with feeding a niche audience. Good stuff. I think, like DC and Marvel, they may sell in bigger quantities, but their stuff isn't any more memorable. I mean, it's so disposable. No one cares. The impact that you're making, even if the fan base or the consumer base is smaller, it's more impactful. When they get the next Inglorious Rex, and they get Inglorious Rex 3, that's going to feel like a big deal, and they know that they're going to get something that was well put together, well made. There's a passion behind it. There's a vision. And that's really what matters. Even if it is niche, like you said, and maybe we're keeping the torch alive for further on down the lane when, things make more sense or something emerges. Maybe not. Maybe if comics only survives and is this niche thing, that's maybe not ideal, but I don't see anything wrong with that.
I don't know if I've ever, in my whole career in comics, thinking back, I don't know if I've ever met anybody that pretended they knew what the future was. Actually, I as alarming as it is, whether it be Dan Didio or Matt Heidelson, the first editor I really ever worked with, they just really wanted to know what was the next big thing, and they would just honestly say, I would do it. They don't know. I mean, they pretend they know. And in this whole conversation, I will tell you, I do not know what the future of comics is. But I know I can look at something that I can tell isn't going to resonate with Superman fans or Batman fans because I have been a fan of these characters and it doesn't resonate with me. We're at a point of, DC Comics with this absolute thing is looking for a version of Superman that no Superman fans ever asked for. They're actually twisting these characters, looking for a new fan, abandoning the Superman fan, but using the character Superman to do it. It doesn't even make sense. Like, logically, it doesn't make sense. It's like, just make the new character. Take that pitch, get rid of Superman, get rid of the S on his chest, and just have that be a new character. But for some reason, it's like they're getting to the point of abandoning the fans flat out. And I mean, maybe we have to build new fans. I mean, it sucks. Not everybody that ever bought Superman or Superman Earth 1 or Superman Batman, they're not going to buy my independent book because they love those characters. Some of them will. I mean, but not all of them. And I mean, it's a big task, but I think the future of comic creators are going to have to start building your own stuff. Quit de-best from corporate characters right now. It's the worst investment for the next big talent that's coming out to go work on those, because the only way anybody's going to make headlines with Superman is if Superman's gay. That's the only time your book is going to get noticed. It's such a bad cycle right now for new creators if you are talented. It's such a bad investment of time. I mean, I can look at my career and I look back and I'm like, I probably should have started doing this earlier than I did. But I do still see books and runs that I should have done. I can look at it and say, this should have been my jumping off point. I probably stayed in American comics a little too long, because those are years I can't get back investing into my own creations. It's risky, I've had success, but I can't always predict my future success. Inglorious Rex 3, week 1, day 1, beat Inglorious Rex 2. We're funding right now at like $143,000. It's doing great, but I can't predict it's always going to do great. I may have to come up with a new book and a new thing to do, or maybe one day I'm just not even doing comics anymore. I don't know. The future is uncertain, but I know what I believe, and I believe in quality comics. I believe in comics without agendas and escapism, and I hope to continue making comics, and I hope people enjoy them, whether the audience is a mainstream audience of 120,000 people, or if I'm just selling 1,500 copies. Like, as long as I'm able to continue doing it, I'm doing it, and as long as the fans are there for me, I'm there for the fans.
Cool. All right, well, we'll start wrapping this up. I appreciate you taking the time. You know, thinking about this topic, I think of like ElfQuest in the 60s, or I think about like Doctor Who in the 90s when these fandoms and these franchises, ElfQuest was ElfQuest was coming up. It wasn't going down, but it was a very much a fan-built kind of big fight. And so I
Yeah.
think there is precedent that maybe things might turn around, but whatever, if it does, even if it does, it's going to be a fight either way. And I think, however it turns out, I think it's going to be ending up all this going back to the fans. It's at that point, at least, I do have a little bit of hope because we're the ones that care, right? The other
Yeah.
people, where it's just disposable media, they don't really care what happens to Superman or Batman. They don't really care what happened to Iceman, really. It was just like this one-time cool thing, and then they completely forgot. So all this will eventually go to the fans. And that's kind of that's my positivity and why I think that even though things kind of suck right now, and like it makes me so sad when I was getting ready for this interview, I was thinking, oh man, I read so many good comics in the early
Yeah.
2010s. I'm like,
Yeah.
what happened?
It's very alarming if you go back only a few years ago to 2010s, where we're at now and where we were, not just in sales, but really mainly the quality. And yeah, I'm very alarmed that people haven't on a corporate structure. I mean, think about it. Why is Jeff Johns, and I'm glad for him, his Ghost Machine stuff, like it looks great. A Brett Geiger, but how in the hell would a company let that talent go? Like, why isn't he, writing your best DC comics right now? Or why isn't he at Marvel writing the best Marvel comics right now? There's a lot of bonehead decisions happening in the American comic book industry, and it might not always be through like, well, what Comicsgate say, but if you really look at where the talent's migrating to and stuff, first, as a fan, I don't like it. As a creator, I wish it all happened a lot sooner. So I'm kind of torn by it, right? I would love to pick up a really good Brian Hitch JLA run or something like that, or a Wonder Woman book by Brian Hitch that really looked like he put his heart and soul into it. Jeff Johns, I would love to see an Iron Man book by Jeff Johns or something like that, or Captain America run by Jeff Johns. I mean, they're just like, there's a lot of missteps happening in the mainstream, but at the same time, I'm very excited that these guys are making their own books too. So I'm torn as a fan and as a creator. I have mixed feelings, and the future is definitely going to be crazy. I'd like to say this is all going to become stable at some point, but it's not. Even on the creator-owned stuff, even on the crowdfunding stuff, we've been dealing with people like, Eric's one of them, Eric July, other people trying to criticize, like people are asking for your money. They don't know how to manage it, stuff like that. But basically attacking the root of crowdfunding. And that's like, you guys are buying the book or funding me so I can make this book a reality. And nobody's ever said, like, the problem with the mainstream comic industry is the books aren't there. I walk into a comic book shop, the books are there. The problem is the quality of them. And a lot of us do need crowdfunding to make these books happen. We need to, because we don't have the corporate cash flow. We don't have the parent company funding us. We don't have hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody working in comics has a bank account full of hundreds of thousands of dollars. So for talented creators to go out here and make books happen in a reality and build this library and try to even rebuild, we're going to have to do crowdfunding, a pre-order system. And here's a weird effing note to people that are like, oh, why isn't their book already done? Marvel and DC's books aren't done when they're getting money for them, okay? They're in a catalog and people are ordering them, and are lucky if the cover is done on those books. So the whole system is a cash flow of pre-order, then the product's being made, and then it goes into the shop. And the retailers are the guy in the middle taking the risk, tying up the money on these products that don't even exist. So, like, the crowdfunding is really not even that different from the way the direct market works, except our turnaround time. And a lot of us are mom and pop shops, okay? Like, we don't have a corporate structure behind us. We don't have a staff of people. Like, Nine Lives Comics runs basically off of me and Yanzi and any talent we hire to color or draw extra pages or stuff like that. I mean, it's basically us. She does the maintenance on the website. Some stuff we can outsource, some stuff we can't. I mean, it's nonstop work for us, and that's not even counting the YouTube and the promotion stuff. So that's the other thing that nobody gives crowdfunders credit for is you have to take the time and actually go out here and market your product. Make sure people know it exists. We don't have 80-year legacy characters doing that for us. We don't have a corporation doing that for us. And I love the backers that support me and support us and the idea of crowdfunding, because I know deep down they understand that this is a lot of hard work and everything's against us. The odds are always against us. We are the new underdogs, and we are the guys that are, as sad as it is, underdogs fighting to make a quality comic. That's retarded, but that is where we're at today. And, the more you support crowdfunding books, the more chances that what we're building can grow into something a lot larger one day. Something that can't be looked past. Something that the book market's going to open itself up to and say, please, can I put this in bookstores? I mean, because the volume that we'll eventually make, the quality that we'll make, it will be undeniable.
All right. Well, hopefully from your mouth to God's ears.
Hopefully. Yeah. And with that said, go back Inglorious Rex 3, everybody.
Yeah.
Up on Nine Lives Comics and Indiegogo, currently funding a whopping $143,000. If you like MMA fighting, you like Godzilla, you're absolutely going to adore Inglorious Rex 3. You can pick up a volume 1 and 2 on Nine Lives Comics shop at the same time. If you don't want to wait for the collection that's in that campaign, you can read it practically tomorrow. It ships out next day. Go pick up a copy of volume 1 and 2 and be caught up and ready for Inglorious Rex 3 when it hits your mailbox.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, you need to follow, as he says, on
YouTube, Talking and Drawing with Shane Davis, and at Shane Davis Art on Twitter.
Yeah, he goes by Lord Shane Cat Pappy Davis CG Baller Squad on Twitter.
Yeah. Well, you have a good time with Ballers. It's a rotating show between me, Dale Keown, and Mandy Summers. On Friday nights, it's a fun time. Come check us out. Friday nights, usually 10 p.m. And also we do the short videos about pop culture and comics and the comic industry on Talking and Drawing with Shane Davis.
Yeah. You even have a fantastic profile picture on that one, too. It's fun.
Yeah, I know. It's all kinds of fun over here, guys. All kinds of fun. And it's got to be fun. It got to make people want to hang around, have a good time. It's not just about selling the comics, but about engaging with the fans and having a good time.
Definitely. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to watch Culturescape today. Thank you so much, Shane, for coming on. I really appreciate it. I think it's always cool when I'm like, oh, I read this guy. I loved his stuff. And now I get to talk to him. I think that's pretty neat. So thank you for that.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. You guys, please check out all of Shane Davis's stuff as we just talked about. Thank you to all the listeners and watchers for supporting the show. Thank you to Bain Books Publishing and Print Simon Schuster for helping put together the show. And of course, Young Voices, a journalism advocacy organization. And to all viewers like you. And so until next time, my friends, keep geeking out. Hey there, gang. If you are a fan of Culturescape, and I know you are, and want to get involved in supporting the show, well, now you can. By joining the Culturescape Patreon, you'll help support me and my editor, Chris, as we create the show and produce more quality journalism. For just $5 or $10 a month, you not only help us, but get access to our exclusive members-only Discord. You'll also get to vote on and suggest new guests for the interview. So if you are a fellow weeb and love Culturescape, then come join us today on Patreon.